So hi, everybody. My name is Jen Turchinow, and I'm the CEO of ARINGO MBA Admissions Consulting. And I'm here today to talk to you guys about the AdCom's perspective on GMAT or GRE. I know it's always a big question, and we are part of GMAT Club today. And so everybody is always thinking GMAT, but there is another option of GRE. And I know that a lot of people have questions about, should I try it or should I not? So that's what we're going to talk about today. And I'm happy to answer questions as we go along using the chat box. But we'll get started. So first, I'll tell you a little bit more about ARINGO. We help our candidates get into top MBA programs year over year. We've been around for almost 20 years, and we do comprehensive unlimited packages that includes everything from a strategy review of your profile all the way down to interview prep, multiple reviews of your application, waitlist assistance. We do everything. So we're here to help you through the entire process. And I will show you our stats that are evaluated by EY every year, but you can also look at them online if you're ever interested. Awesome. So again, today we are going to be talking about top MBA programs, what the application requires, and then take that deep dive into standardized tests. And so I will tell you, as we start this presentation, I am in no way an exam or test prep professional, right? So I do not have the expertise to help you with, knowing exactly how to answer questions, but I do know enough about them to help you understand how the admissions committee will receive or their perspective on them when you submit them with your application. So I'm going to provide that information from the admissions committee standpoint. If you need help with the actual test and prep, then there's definitely a lot of amazing consultants that are willing to help you and do all the exam prep with you, but that's not me. So I won't be able to answer any technical questions today about the exams. So we'll get started. So here are some of the top universities in the US. You should probably recognize many of them: Harvard, Stanford, Wharton. We also have Chicago Booth, who's really come into its own in the past, 5-10 years. We also have Columbia, Darden, Berkeley, Yale, Michigan Ross, NYU, Cornell Johnson, lots of really great brand name schools that are in the top rankings of MBA programs. Sometimes people refer to the M7, the T10, which is top 10, or T15, and that's the top 15 MBA programs. This is somewhat of a collection of them, but I'll dive a little bit deeper into that once we kind of look at scores and you can kind of see the rankings. And then here are some top universities in Europe. So LBS, INSEAD, HSA, Bocconi, IMD, Oxford, Cambridge. Some of those are the classics. Some of them are really just business schools. So their name isn't as common, not a household name, like you might be like, oh, Oxford or Cambridge, but these are business schools and that are really well known within the business community. So these are the top schools that we're going to kind of be referencing today as far as, applications and GMAT, GRE scores. So we'll dive in really quickly into what all an MBA application entails. So first, they're going to have you register online and create your profile in the portal itself. They're going to ask you for your undergrad transcripts. They're going to ask you for your resume, and we want to convert that over from a typical resume or CV over to an MBA resume. It's more achievement-based. And then they're going to be looking for you to share your thoughts and passion and insights into the MBA through maybe 1 to 7 essays, depending on the school. So HBS has that famous 1 essay of what should we know about you. And then schools like Stanford, HEC, or INSEAD are more of we have a lot of questions for you. We want to get to know some in-depth parts of you. So 1 to 7 essays, and usually 1 to 2 letters of recommendation from professionals who've worked with you. And then they'll also be asking for exams. And so, sometimes if you studied outside of the US, or Europe, they might want you to take like an English proficiency exam because all top MBA programs are taught in English. So they're going to want to be able to see verification of your English skills along with other things. And then beyond that, there is the famous GMAT, GRE, or executive assessment. And so those are kind of the three main exams that they'll accept as part of your entire application. So I'll tell you that there's not one component that weighs the most out of any of these. Most MBA programs are going to take a comprehensive look at your entire profile and want to see if you have the right balance of work experience as well as teamwork and ability to work across different cultures, as well as the capabilities of academic readiness for their rigorous MBA programs. And that's where the entrance exams will come. Yeah. So Lavin, yes, you're right. So we'll talk about this too, but HBS did announce that they're not going to be accepting the new GMAT focus this year. And I think that they're just trying to be fair to candidates who are applying this year, since round one won't be able to submit the new focus GMAT, that they're just going to accept only the regular GMAT. So if you're planning on applying to HBS, that's definitely something to know. All right, so now let's talk about these standardized tests. So all of them are going to help schools with understanding and assessing your academic readiness for the program. And it's a way to compare candidates from tons of different backgrounds, academic backgrounds, whether you did STEM or something that's more of in the arts, and being able to see like, okay, as a whole, here's where you're performing with compared to your cohort, right? And so what schools will do is they will do a ton of statistical analysis on what GMAT scores or GRE scores have done well in the MBA program. And that's how they kind of come up with a bit of a range for what's acceptable for their school. And so that's where you'll see they can maybe do a little bit of a give and take and say like, okay, we still have seen candidates with a 690 do really well in our program. So it's not necessarily all about GMAT score or GRE score, but it's about what you bring to the program. So they might be willing to sacrifice a little bit more on that, because they could say that they still have performance indicators from past students that have done well, even though they technically had, a GMAT or GRE score below the average. And so they have kind of their own internal range that they're willing to accept based on historical data. So the type of tests that are available. So we have the current GMAT that's been around for many years. And then we have the GMAT Focus Edition that's going to be coming out this fall. And like Lavin brought up, maybe bringing a little bit of twist into the plot for the fall 24 admission cycle. So we'll see what other schools and how they respond with the Focus Edition. They may not see any issue with accepting it. And then there's the GRE, and then there's the executive assessment, or the EA. And so the EA was more created for candidates that are applying to executive MBA programs that maybe have a longer distance between the last time they were in a classroom and where they are now. And it should be more of assessing what their current skill sets are. So you can see it's a little bit different between those three exams. So I do have a bit of a breakdown for the different exams as far as it's related to the GRE, the GMAT, and the GMAT Focus. So right now, let's focus on GRE and GMAT. So both of them are relatively same in the amount of time that it's going to take. 3 hours and 45 minutes or 3 hours and 7 minutes. It's still grueling, no matter what way you look at it. And then there's different number of sections. And this is how you might think about, like, people will say, choose the test that best suits the way that you test, or like fits your testing techniques, or, what best fits you. And so having multiple sections might be something that's a lot easier for you as a test taker, so that you can kind of break things down a little bit more mentally. And believe me, there's a lot more that goes into this that a lot of the GMAT GRE experts can definitely tell you. But, from a more 1,000-foot level, there are different sections that you'll be going through. So most of them are going to have very similar sections: quantitative reasoning, verbal reasoning, analytical writing, and then there's the AWA and the research or reasoning sections. So they all kind of have different labels, so to say, but all essentially going to be measuring the same types of abilities. And so we usually kind of like zoom out and say, like, what's your quantitative or your verbal score? So those are the two sections that MBA committees are most interested in. The AWA or the IR can play a role if by chance you have a lower GPA or you have something else that's like on the cusp. They could use those for just helping and assisting with deciding, who, like, if you could survive in their program academically or not. So we have the durations here that you can obviously look at and review by yourself, but essentially, it's between 30 to 60 minutes per section. And obviously having more sections, the GRE have little or less time in each one of those sections, which again is, if you want to break things up easier, that's definitely a little bit easier for you. Especially the difference between the way that the two exams test is the GMAT will get either progressively easier or harder based on your answers and each answer. The GRE will get progressively harder or easier based on each section. So they're going to do things in chunks versus like each question itself. So, again, there's a lot of mechanics that go behind this, but that's, again, another way to think of a difference between the two exams that you have available to you. Actually, I want to go back real quick, and I want to talk about the Focus Edition. Again, like, there's this new test that's coming out or the new version of the GMAT, and it's going to be much shorter, much more condensed. I assume that this is kind of on the back of some schools accepting the executive assessment and them deciding, or GMAC, the Graduate Management Association college. Now I can't remember what GMAC stands for some reason. But GMAC decided that they would create another test to be able to kind of maybe, give you a little bit of a reprieve, and maybe it won't be as bad. Because most of the time we'll tell students that they need to study 6 to 8 weeks for the exam. And when it comes to the executive assessment, which is, again, like a 90-minute exam, we'll tell them it might be like 2 to 3 weeks with refreshers. So I'm wondering where we'll land with how long it takes to prepare for the GMAT Focus Edition. And we'll see what will be kind of coming out from there. Muthika, you study for both the GMAT and GRE, and you find that the quant and the GRE is easier and seems shorter and helps me focus better in GRE. Good insights. And they also, there's all kinds of like different opinions, but some people say if you're better at verbal, that the GRE is better, and if you're better at quant, the GMAT is better. I think that, again, it's grain of salt, and you could try both. And that's another great point, is that both of these exams offer a free, test exam so that you can see how you perform on both. If you want to try the GRE, you go to www.ets.org, or if you want to try the GMAT, it's www.mba.com, and register for those exams, and you get to do the practice and see which one is better for you. I don't think it's a waste of time if you're just starting out the whole process and a little bit lost or confused as to which one's going to be better, just because, again, you're going to be studying for very similar type questions with the quantitative, the verbal, and analytical. So I don't think it's that much of a waste if you're trying to decide which is better for you. Okay, so now this is kind of a great breakdown or representation of, what the different schools are representing as far as their average GRE and their average GMAT score. A lot of the times, you will find a GMAT GRE converter. And I would say it's not comparing apples to apples, because sometimes, like, you will see, like with Wharton, their GRE average is 324. It does not, when we look at that converter, it does not equal 733. It equals much more like a 710-ish. So you'll see that you don't have to do a direct correlation. I would definitely be looking at the average score for the GMAT or the GRE to understand where you should be landing with your score versus using that converter, because it's not always accurate to what's being accepted. And you may be pushing yourself too hard if you're trying to get a GRE that is equivalent to a 733. By that converter, you're looking, a bit higher, like, a 330 or 330 plus. So, it's a little bit different in that, the GRE is every point counts, whereas the GMAT is every 10 points count, because it's a 10-point scale. So a little bit different. The converter, it's a tool that you could use, but honestly, I always recommend that our clients look at the average GRE and GMAT score. And if there's an offering of the range, then you can also look at that. Like, most schools will be publishing the range of their GMAT score, whereas they will publish the average quant and the average verbal for their GRE. And that's a good point to talk about as well. So most schools are going to they will absolutely publish their GMAT score. Not all schools, like you'll see here, there's a couple NAs, will not publish their GRE scores. And the reason is because MBA programs are currently ranked in any of the ranking systems as part of the GMAT score, being part of that whole picture that the ranking system is looking at. They use the GMAT score. They do not rank by GRE score, which is a small caveat for you to know that if the GRE score is not reported or part of rankings, then they have more leeway in the scores that they accept. So if you're having a hard time with the GMAT, that could be a great option. So if we look here, it's a wide range. Like Columbia, a 322 GRE score, 319 for Darden. Again, like, these are great ranges to look at, like, when you're trying to say, like, okay, my number one school is, and if I want to get there, here's the average score that I should try to meet or exceed to be a competitive candidate. And if I'm having a really hard time getting, within 10 to 20 points of that score, then you may want to consider the GRE and try that to see if you could get a little bit closer to their average GRE or be within the range. So next, we'll talk about EU schools. So you'll see that there's not GRE scores published at all. Most of the European UK schools will only disclose their GMAT score. They do accept GRE scores though. So, if we you'll have to instead of, again, doing that converter, go back and look at what, so I know I'm going to bounce around here a little bit, but so we'll say 710. So if the school's average is closer to 710, maybe a 324, maybe a little bit lower, could be a nice equivalent for the GRE for a school like INSEAD. So it is a little bit of a guesswork as far as what the equivalent would be for those schools, but it definitely is something that you should be considering when applying to the European UK schools, that you can use a GRE. It doesn't make you exclude them from your school list at all. All right, so now let's talk about waivers. So a lot of schools over the past couple of years, with COVID, the pandemic, with the tech layoffs, everything that's happened, there have been some exceptions made for different candidates in different situations. So this is these are from fall 23 application cycle. So, everything is subject to change, but Kellogg was offering a test waiver upon request. And sometimes this was related to COVID. So if you had an impact by COVID that prevented you from taking the exam, then they may offer you a waiver. MIT offered a waiver. Columbia also accepts the executive assessment, which is awesome because, again, that's a 90-minute assessment. And especially if you're on that cusp of maybe also applying to part-time or executive MBA programs, because you're kind of like at that nearing 10-year mark, definitely could be an advantage if you're applying to Columbia as well. So Tuck, again, they had that waiver. I don't know if all these waivers will come through for fall 24 because I believe a lot of these related more to COVID. But as we move into Ross, Stern, Darden, they are accepting a much more wider range of scores. So if you were thinking about medical school before and shifted, or if you are in the medical field and want to move into get your MBA as well. So MCAT, LSAT, PCAT, there's so many different exams that you could potentially use in lieu of your GMAT or GRE. Fuqua is also accepting the EA. And actually, I believe that Stern was also accepting the executive assessment. Not sure if that changed, and it's just not on this chart. And then, Cornell last year also offered a waiver. So we'll see what happens. I know that COVID kind of set this precedent that the GMAT or GRE score is not always the end all be all of what somebody's academic readiness can be. And some schools are testing around with test optional. We'll see what happens in fall 24 applications. So far, we've only had Stanford and HBS publish their application requirements. And so as of right now, both of them are requiring the GMAT or GRE. So we shall see what moves on before, or like what happens as we move in and, schools in the top 10 or 15 start to publish their applications. It could get a little bit more interesting. So now the main point of this conversation is to really talk about what does the AdCom think about GMAT versus GRE or a waiver. So the GMAT, which many of you may know, is specifically made for MBA programs or business schools. So it has that quantitative and analytical side. The GRE is designed for any graduate program at large, and it's used across the globe for entry into graduate school and can be applied across multiple sides. So or multiple disciplines. And so with that being said, that's why some people will say that, GRE is easier if you're not as strong in quant, but a little bit better in verbal. And that's why you might see that difference as well. So I think I talked about this a little bit earlier, but again, GRE scores are a little bit more flexible as far as the range of scores that they're willing to accept because they're not published always. And there's also not a ranking depending on what that average GRE score is, at least not yet. We'll see what happens. Things might evolve because as you can see, my next point is that some of the biggest schools, Stanford, Wharton, MIT, over 30% of their students were admitted with a GRE. So, we don't have to live in this misnomer of, oh, schools only want a GMAT. You can absolutely apply with a GRE. So beyond that, if you were to ask any school, which one should I take? They'll usually tell you, take whichever you do the best in. And so they want you to, kind of decide, hey, this is what's the best suited exam for me and my test taking style. Beyond that, and not written on here, so secret, is if you're saying that you want to move into finance or you want to move into MBB consulting, know that sometimes GMAT and GREs or GMAT scores are part of the consideration when they look at hiring. So it's the employers that are looking for the GMAT score, not necessarily the school itself. So when you're pitching, your short-term or long-term goal is that you want to work in MBB or you want to go into finance, IB, PE, they are going to be looking at a GMAT score, asking for a GMAT score eventually. So you should know this going into the process, and likely if that is exactly what you want to do, then I would certainly choose the GMAT to best streamline your process so you don't have to take the GMAT or feel in a handicap later on whenever you are applying for your internship and your full-time roles post MBA. So just keep that in mind, because MBA programs also know that. So if you're saying, I plan to go on MBB and I'm applying with a GRE score, they might feel like it's a little bit of a mismatch and say, I don't know if you're going to survive in MBB applications because you don't have a GMAT score. Again, COVID has changed a lot of things. And so some of the MBB and some finance employers will be open or amenable to GRE scores. But for the most part, from what I've heard, what most people have heard is they're still looking at GMAT scores. So just be aware of that. That's pretty much all I have to share for you guys today. What questions do you have that I can help answer about GMAT, GRE, or MBA, admissions, application? I'm here and ready to help. All right. Kind of quiet. So we'll give it a few more seconds if anybody has any questions. Beyond that, like I said, HBS and Stanford have kind of published their applications thus far for the fall 24 cycle, thinking that it'll start to rain applications here in the next couple of weeks, maybe the next month. Typically we'll see like Columbia, because they also have a J term, which, Levin, I'm so sorry, I did not answer that question for you earlier, but we can definitely get into that in just a second. But Columbia does have a J term, and they use the same application for fall 24 as they do for January 24. So they usually publish a little bit earlier than most of the other schools. So as far as schools that do have a J term or spring start, there is Columbia, INSEAD, there's HEC Paris, there's some of the Canadian schools. IESE also has spring start as well. So there's quite a few different options as far as like, hey, I want to get started sooner than later, I want to apply for January. I will say that those IMD also starts in RSM, start in January. So if you're looking at those schools, we're either in the end of round 2, where you should be submitting your application for January 24, and moving into round 3. So, and HEC Paris has like 16, or actually just 10 different admission cycles. So you're okay and totally fine. But if you're wanting to apply for January 24, need to get on that soon. Looking forward to a master's in finance, looking to give GMAT in a few weeks, targeting. What school should you suggest? Good question. Master's in finance. So some of the schools that are most well known for finance are going to be Booth, Wharton, Columbia. Texas McCombs actually has a really strong master's in finance program. You can also look at LBS or LSE, depending on where you're wanting to be. The GMAT GRE score is a little bit more flexible in some of the master's programs. It just depends on the applicant pool you're coming from. Sometimes it can be a bit more competitive for you. But I think that the schools I mentioned can be competitive. It all is in kind of making sure that you're focusing your short-term and your long-term goals to make sense with that school and where you want to be. Yes. Please like our session and share it with your friends. Give us a thumbs up if you've enjoyed this conversation so far. Harish, I'm extremely sorry on the session a couple minutes ago. Question. For MS in finance, which one would be a better option? So for doing an MS in finance, I do believe that the GMAT is going to be a stronger option. And the reason is that you're going to be going into the finance industry. They're going to be looking for strong quant skills. And by far, schools do feel that the GMAT does do a better job of showing your analytical readiness for that academic coursework. So I would definitely try to lead with the GMAT, but they will accept GRE as well. So if you've already taken the GRE, then that's totally fine. But I would say if you're starting from scratch, I would start with the GMAT. Which of these MBA colleges have good concentrations in international business? So honestly, all MBA programs are going to have some sort of concentration in international business because it's somewhat like the general curriculum of an MBA should be that you're going to have an intercultural experience with your cohort, right? So if you're looking for the most international, we're going to be talking about Columbia, NYU. Those are going to be two of the most international in the US. And then when we talk about the UK or Europe, we have INSEAD and LBS that are around 90% international students. So those are two great schools to be looking at for international experience. And then as far as international business, there's definitely some add-ons that you can do. A lot of programs offer dual degrees. So if you're looking for a specific sector or function, that's definitely something you can add on to most of these MBA programs. Guillermo, how long is it recommended to study for taking the GMAT and GRE? So we usually tell our clients to study for about 6 to 8 weeks for the GMAT or GRE, and that's the current ones, not the new Focus Edition. But typically it'll take about that long to take your first exam and feel prepared. There's a lot of different cadences that you can take. You can take the exam and see where you go and then decide your study plan. But for the most part, I've seen people usually do 6 to 8 weeks. And then, not everybody gets 700 or breaks, 315 on their first attempt. So it's okay if you have to take a second attempt. Don't, beat yourself up over that because, it takes time and practice and you're getting used to something that's, one, it's pretty awkward to take an exam either at home while somebody's watching you or in a testing center. If it's not something you've done since you were a little kid, as some of our friends might have had exams all their life. But, it's an awkward situation. You're learning the cadence, you're learning the process. So you may have to take it twice. So I would always say, if you can, leave enough room for you to take the exam twice before you plan to submit your application. You can work on your application in tandem at the same time while you study for the exam. I'm always happy to talk about any parts of the process and how we can kind of get started before you get your exam score as well. I already have a master's degree in economics. Will this affect my M7 MBA applications in any way or shape? Okay, so if you already have a master's degree, this can be fantastic, right? So it all depends on your story and how you're pitching yourself to the MBA program and why your master's in economics definitely helps you with this next step in your career. Where this can get a little burdensome is depending on, one, how long ago you took the additional master's degree, and then two, how old you are. So I know this gets a little bit tricky. So if you took like an MBA class, like I know a lot of people will do in India, like you might do one immediately after you graduate, like a PGDM or a PGP. So if you took that immediately after you graduated from your undergrad experience, we're going to pitch it much more of like taking a master's in management, because typically it won't include an internship. You'll have no business experience or work experience to really have like an application. So what we're going to pitch it as is much more of a master's in management theory, right? Like, because you wouldn't have had any work experience. But if you have a master's degree from another area, it depends on when you got that. So if you got it immediately after your undergrad, usually that means that you're okay. When it starts to be a little bit nerve-wracking or scary is when you're starting to edge over 10 years of work experience or over the age of 30. M7 typically likes to have applicants that are closer to that 27 years of age and they're a little bit more strict about it than some of the other schools, like in the T15, T20. And so they're going to be a little bit more strict there. There are obviously always exceptions, and especially if you come from a different, like if your master's took 2 years, that could definitely be something. But a lot of times they're just trying to also make sure that you're not overqualified and that you're employable post MBA. That's really going to be their biggest factors that they're going to be looking at. So again, depends on how you pitch your profile. We have time for more questions. All right, so again, while we wait for the last few questions, give us a like, thumbs up, and then share with your friends. Hopefully you found this time helpful. I know, again, a lot of the times people are always debating, like, what's the difference between GMAT and GRE? Again, technical side, talk to an expert. But as far as what the admissions committee thinks, for the most part, they're going to want you to do whichever exam you do the best in. That's their job, is to figure out how to include you into the cohort instead of how to exclude you. So just know that they readily accept folks with the GRE. All right. Any other questions? All right, awesome. So my contact information is here. Again, my name is Jen with ARINGO MBA Admissions Consulting. We would love to help you with your MBA admissions applications for fall 24, fall beyond, even spring. So if you have any questions, I'm here to help. I've been working at admissions for the past 10 years and love to help people. I will, anybody wants to speak about things, you can obviously send me an email at my email address. I'll ask that we also post, one second here. I'll ask if we can post my GMAT Club profile review link. Sorry for this. But let me put this in the chat for Sajad to help. But we'll get that added either to the PowerPoint or the presentation after we get this uploaded to YouTube, or maybe it might get loaded into the chat of my link for GMAT Club profile evaluations. Please, see, there it is. So please feel free to reach out, schedule a time to meet with me if you have questions about your profile, MBAs, or anything. I'm here to help. Awesome. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day, great night, and we'll see you at MBA Spotlight in a couple of weeks.